We're going to go ahead and start with Unit 0. It's basically everything that happens up until 1200. So get your notebooks ready. Here we go. The first event that is noteworthy is the Agricultural Revolution or the Neolithic Revolution. And this is basically where people go from hunting and gathering to settling down and becoming more sedentary, where they're farming. There are several changes that occur throughout this time period. For example, the population grows and people start to live in bigger settlements. We also have new technology such as the wheel, which help people be more efficient. During this time, we see specialized labor, and that is where basically we have artisans and merchants and people who are coming out as blacksmiths and performing special skills. Another change that occurs is that we have stronger governments, better taxation systems, which will in turn lead to bigger civilizations as well. There are some negatives to the Neolithic Revolution where we see an increased competition for resources, which will cause conflict in some areas. We also see social hierarchies form and the status of women is reduced. Early on in history, we have 4 major river valley civilizations. The first one I'll mention is Mesopotamia. The 2 rivers that this civilization lives off of are the Tigris and Euphrates. Other things to note about Mesopotamia is that it's made up of city-states. They're polytheistic and their writing system is cuneiform. Another key factor is that they codify law. Actually, King Hammurabi codifies it in what's called Hammurabi's Code. And the gist of that is an eye for an eye. If you do this, then this happens to you. The next river valley civilization I'll mention is the Egyptian river valley. That one is formed around the Nile River, and their writing system is hieroglyphics. They are known for the pharaohs and the pyramids. The next river valley is the Indus River Valley. That one is close to the Indus River, and they are known for their settlements that have indoor plumbing. Their religion is polytheistic. And the last river valley civilization is the Chinese River Valley, next to the Yellow River. They have a patriarchal central government, and they believe in ancestor veneration, which is basically honoring and worshiping your ancestors that have gone before you. All of the river valley civilizations are polytheistic religions. Other religions during this time are Hinduism and Judaism. Hinduism is sometimes considered monotheistic and sometimes considered polytheistic. It's based on the text, the Vedas. They also believe in reincarnation and the caste system. The caste system is just another way of talking about the class system. It's a very strict hierarchy. Judaism is the first monotheistic religion. The Jews believe that they are the chosen people of God, and their scripture is the Torah. They are tied very closely with Islam and Christianity, which we'll talk about later. Let's get into the classical era. This is from 600 BCE to 600 CE. During this time, the Silk Road develops. Not only does the Silk Road provide trade, but it also spreads religions and philosophies. One of those philosophies is Buddhism. Buddhism comes from South Asia, and it's based on the 4 Noble Truths. Basically, that entails that people should follow the 8-fold path in order to reduce their suffering and eventually eliminate suffering altogether and reach enlightenment. It is done through reflection, meditation, and giving up all earthly pleasures. The reason that Buddhism is so popular, especially among the lower classes of people, is because they reject the caste system and they seek to convert any people. They also start monasteries throughout the region. Let's move on to empires in South Asia. The first one we're going to talk about during this time frame is the Mauryan Empire. Its golden age is when Ashoka was in charge. He has an efficient tax system, and he also builds a lot of infrastructure while he is the emperor. He actually converts from Hinduism to Buddhism and helps spread the faith throughout that region. The Gupta Empire takes over after the Mauryan Empire, and this is considered the golden age of India. They have a centralized government and a flourishing of culture and education. They also advance in medicine and math during this time. Their social structure is patriarchal, and men hold most of the power in public life. Let's talk about the empires in East Asia. First up, we have the Zhou dynasty. They are known as the Warring States because it's a very decentralized government in China at this time. They also believe in the mandate of heaven, which is basically that the gods set up the emperor. As long as the emperor has the favor of the gods, then he will be able to continue to reign. However, if the emperor falls out of favor with the gods, they no longer have the mandate of heaven. And thus occurs the dynastic cycle, where the dynasties rise and fall according to what's going on in China at the time. So for example, if there's a famine, the people may think that the emperor has lost the mandate of heaven and overthrow that dynasty and usher in the new one. Also during this time, the government leaned heavily on the Confucianism philosophies. The teachings came from writings called the Analects and basically taught people how to live their life. It wasn't as focused on a deity, it was focused on more of ways that you should live. For example, filial piety, respecting your elders, as well as living in harmony with other people. Also around this time was Taoism. This was opposite of Confucianism in that it told people how to be one with nature versus living in harmony with each other. You were more in harmony with nature through Taoism. And it was more about internal reflection versus Confucianism external behavior. Up next, we have the Qin dynasty, as well as the Han dynasty that comes after. During this time, centralized government is established in China, as well as a standardized Chinese script and a standard weights and measurement system. And infrastructure is built, like canals and roads. This is considered the golden age of China. Chinese science also grows during this time, and we see inventions like the magnetic compass come into existence. Also during the Han Dynasty, they start to use the civil service exams, which basically allows for some upward mobility if you can pass the exam. Moving on to empires in Western Eurasia. The first one is Persia. Persia is in the location of present-day Iran. One of their great emperors is Cyrus the Great, and they have a very strong centralized government and a large network of roads. The next empire at this time is Greece. Greece is made up of several different city-states. Two of the most famous ones are Sparta and Athens. Sparta was more militaristic. That's where we get the movie Sparta. And Athens is more about culture. Later in the 300s BCE, we have Alexander the Great, who built a vast empire incorporating Egypt, Persia, and some of India. During this time, he spreads the Greek culture, and this is called the spreading of Hellenistic culture. Our next empire is Rome. Rome borrowed from the Greeks and had mostly similar gods. They also relied heavily on slaves. They made advances in government, such as representative government, and they had the 12 tables of law that protected individual rights for male citizens. They were a patriarchal society, however, the women had more rights in Rome than they did in Greece. Rome eventually expands to a vast empire, but because of several different issues, they decline and they eventually fall in 476 CE, mostly due to corruption, invasions from the outside, and epidemics sweeping through the area. One noteworthy thing that happens during this time in Rome is the development of Christianity. At the time, the Jews were in the Roman Empire, and they were heavily persecuted for being monotheistic. Jesus is born during this time frame and declares himself the Messiah that the Jews are waiting for. However, the Jews reject him as the Messiah, and Christianity starts as a result. Jesus spreads Christianity through the 12 disciples and his followers as he goes through the area. Because he's rejected by the Jews, he's eventually crucified. His crucifixion results in the forgiveness of Christian sins. Basically, he paid the price for the sin of the world. And Christians believe that he forgives sins through his sacrifice for them. Christianity was very attractive to poor people because they didn't have a lot of rights, whereas Christianity accepted them. Christianity becomes legal under Emperor Constantine and continues to spread during that time. By the middle of the 4th century, the Roman Empire was somewhat split in half. On one side, we had the Byzantine Empire, which was heavily involved in trade and becoming very wealthy. And on the other side, we had Western Rome. Constantine decides to move the capital to Constantinople because that's the side that's doing very well. We also have another important emperor, Justinian the Great. Justinian the Great codifies the laws in what he calls the Justinian Code, and he also builds the Hagia Sophia, which will eventually become a mosque once Constantinople is taken over by the Ottomans. Let's hop across the ocean now to the Americas. In America, we have the Mayans and the Aztecs. The Mayans have a complex language. They have the concept of zero. They also have a calendar that they invent, and they study the movement of Earth and space. The Aztecs have a very large multicultural area that's close to present-day Mexico City. They build religious temples and are also involved in human sacrificing. We'll talk more about them in the next video. By 600 CE, the classical civilizations start to decline, and this is because they're losing political strength and they're lacking unification. They have several challenges. For example, taxing challenges, decline in trade, disease spreading, a big gap between rich and poor, poor leadership, and also outside invasions. So the post-classical time frame starts in 600 and goes to 1200 CE. This is when we see the beginning of some new trade networks like the Indian Ocean trade route and the Trans-Saharan trade route. We also see Islam emerging. Muhammad says that he gets a message from God. That message is what he bases the Quran on and the beliefs of Islam. For example, they believe in the 5 pillars of faith, and those would be the belief in Allah, praying daily, a pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in your life, giving to charity, and fasting. They also come up with what's called Shariah law, which is basically the religion controlling the state as well. After Muhammad dies, there's a split between the Sunnis and the Shia because they can't decide who should take his place. That split has led to problems that we deal with even still today. Despite this split, Islam spreads rapidly. It goes from Spain all the way to India in what's called Dar al-Islam, or the world of Islam. Eventually, the Abbasid Caliphate forms. This is considered the golden age of Islam. Trade increases. They help China transform the Silk Road. They also help improve the Trans-Saharan trade route and the Indian Ocean trade route. There's advances in medicine and science, which will eventually spread to the rest of the world. They also impose the JIZYA tax on everyone who is non-Muslim. However, they do allow them to keep their faith as long as they're paying this tax. So real quick, let's go over the connection between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Basically, they all serve the same God. They're all coming from Abraham. However, the Muslims claim that Abraham's first son, Ishmael, is the chosen one by God, whereas the Jews and the Christians think that Abraham's son, Isaac, is the chosen one. The difference is that Ishmael was born of Hagar, which was Abraham's second wife, and Isaac was born of Sarah, which is his first wife. Basically, the story goes that Abraham and Sarah wanted to have a child, and God told them they would, but they didn't wait. They were not patient. And so Abraham goes and has a child with Hagar. In the meantime, Sarah eventually gets pregnant with Isaac, and their two lines are constantly at strife with each other. That happens all the way back in time and still affects the world today. Also, the other problem is that the Muslim holy sites are in very similar places as the Jewish and Christian holy sites. For example, the Dome of the Rock, where Muhammad ascends into heaven, sits right on top of the Jewish temple. Well, where the old Jewish temple stood. The old Jewish temple is still in Jerusalem today. However, it's not in its complete form. The part that's still there is called the Western Wall. That's the holy spot for the Jews, and it's also revered by Christians as well. Well, the Dome of the Rock sits right on top of that area. The Jews would eventually like to rebuild the temple. In order for them to do that, they would have to destroy the Dome of the Rock, which is probably going to cause World War III, because you can imagine that the Muslims are not going to be very happy about that. So we see all the way back in world history these events and how they're continuing throughout time to cause strife. There's also tension between the Jews and the Muslims because of the fact that after World War II, the Jews were given Israel, or their homeland, and the Palestinians were kicked out of that area. We'll get to that when we talk about that unit a little bit later. So you can see there's a long history between these three religions and how they tie together. Let's move on to China. So when we last left China, they were being ruled by the Han Dynasty. After the Han Dynasty, the Sui Dynasty takes over. And they build the Grand Canal, which will connect agricultural lands and help the economy be more efficient and stronger. After the Sui Dynasty, we have the Tang Dynasty. They extend the borders into Mongolia, learn how to grow a better form of rice, continue with the civil service exam, as well as promote gunpowder, the use of paper, and more trade. They also developed the tribute system, which basically means that in order to trade with China, the outside countries had to pay China tribute. That system will eventually go away when the Mongols take over and form the Yuan Dynasty. And the reason it goes away is because the Yuan Dynasty is ruled by the Mongols, who are nomads or outsiders to China. Therefore, they think that the tribute system is not needed. After After the Tang Dynasty, we have the Song Dynasty. They lead in manufacture of iron, steel, and porcelain. During that dynasty, the magnetic compass and paper money begin to spread to other parts of the world. They also come up with Neo-Confucianism, which is basically a syncretic religion that blends Confucianism, Buddhist, and Taoism together. Syncretic is the blend of something to create something new, and Neo-Confucianism is the perfect example of that. Moving on now to Japan. They are very influenced by China, however, they do have a separate culture. Their government is very decentralized and run by powerful clans. They do have a political hierarchy. The shogun is at the top, then they have the daimyo. The daimyo is similar to the nobles of European feudalism, followed by the samurai, who are the military force and protect the nobles. Below them are the peasants and merchants. Shinto is their chosen religion. Shinto is the belief of ancestor of veneration as well as nature. Moving on now to Africa. In Africa, we have small clans that are kin-based. There is some spreading when we have the Bantu migration, which spreads the language and farming techniques as well as how to work with iron. Trade will begin to benefit Northern Africa as well as the eastern coast. Moving on to South Asia, Northern India is very disunified at this time, whereas Southern Asia is very unified. Southern Asia also flourishes from trade, specifically the Indian Ocean trade route, which depends on monsoon winds. The traders coming from Africa would come when the monsoon winds are blowing towards India, and they would go back when they were blowing towards Africa in order to speed up the process. On to Europe now. Rome falls in 476 CE, and that leaves most of Europe without protection. And they needed protection, especially from outside invaders such as the Vikings. But with no central government, that was very difficult. So Europe breaks up into kingdoms. Around 800 CE is when the Holy Roman Empire was around, and it is run by Charlemagne. It is an example of one of those kingdoms. There's also some differences that are occurring in the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholics on the west side believe in certain doctrines that the Byzantine Catholics don't necessarily agree with, and vice versa. So in 1054, we have the Great Schism, where those two split into two separate churches. In the west, we have the Roman Catholic Church, and in the east is the Orthodox Catholic Church. Another event that takes place is the Holy Crusades. This is when the Muslims will no longer let Christians come to the Holy Land and see the holy sites that are there. And so the Pope sends knights and anyone who will go basically to try to get the Holy Land back. And he tells them that all your sins will be forgiven if you go and fight for the Holy Land. This happens in 1095, and there are several crusades. In the end, though, the Christians lose and the Muslims continue to have control. However, one result of the Holy Crusades is that the Knights bring back culture from the Middle East, as well as new technologies that are in high demand in Europe once people find out that they exist. All of this leads up to 1200. So what does the world look like around 1200 CE? They're basically recovering from the collapse of the classical civilizations, and new states are emerging. Afro-Eurasia is connected through all of the trade routes. You have the Indian Ocean trade route, Trans-Saharan trade route, as well as the Silk Road. There is some stability provided by the Byzantine Empire as well as Dar al-Islam. China and Dar al-Islam are centers of innovation and learning. Western Europe and Japan are very decentralized. Africa is mostly led by small tribes. And Afro-Eurasia, America, and Oceania are developing separately. And that's where we are as we go into Unit 1. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss a thing. Not only does the Silk Road and help spread the faith throughout that region. Where the dynasties